My nephew Colby was only 7 years old when he looked me dead in the eyes at his sister's funeral and asked if he should tell me where his daddy really took my baby 5 years ago. That's when I realized the child I'd just buried wasn't mine. I'm Jessica, and I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. For 5 years, I raised a little girl named Meredith. I held her through countless seizures, sang to her through 3 open-heart surgeries, and memorized every beep of every machine that kept her alive. When she died 6 days ago, I thought my world had ended. But standing in that funeral home, listening to my 7-year-old nephew's whispered confession, I discovered that my world had actually ended 5 years earlier. I just hadn't known it. My brother Garrett was the golden child in our family. While I struggled through community college and worked double shifts at Target, he blazed through business school and built a real estate empire before turning 30. Our parents used to joke that they got one child who inherited the brains and one who inherited the heart. They died 2 years before this nightmare began, which might be the only blessing in this whole twisted story. At least they never had to know what their son was capable of. The main players in this tragedy all stood in that funeral home that day. There was Garrett himself, 42 years old, designer suit perfectly pressed, giving the performance of his life as the grieving uncle. His wife Wendy clutched his arm, her face a masterpiece of practiced sorrow for a child she'd barely visited in 3 years. Their son Colby stood apart from them, this serious little boy with his father's dark hair but thankfully his mother's conscience. And then there was Meredith, my Meredith, the child I'd loved with a fierceness that surprised me every single day. She should have been there with us, but instead, she lay in that small white casket, wearing the purple dress she'd picked out herself just 2 weeks earlier. "For when I get better, Mommy," she'd said. "Purple makes me look less pale." But according to Colby, she wasn't really mine at all. The funeral home was packed with people from our community. Meredith's physical therapist, Paulo, was there, the man who'd spent 3 years teaching her to walk again after her second surgery. Her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had closed her eyes during Garrett's speech, probably remembering how Meredith had insisted on attending school even when she could barely hold a pencil. Dr. Hensley stood in the back corner, and I remember thinking it was odd how he wouldn't make eye contact with anyone. The Vaughns were there too, though I didn't know who they were at the time. A well-dressed couple in their 50s, they sat 3 rows behind me. The woman kept staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Her husband held her hand so tightly, his knuckles were white. Later, I would learn they'd driven down from Manhattan, drawn by a newspaper obituary that Garrett had tried to keep out of print. Garrett's eulogy was a masterpiece of manipulation. He talked about courage and family bonds, about how Meredith had taught us all to appreciate every sunrise. He actually said the words, "She was exactly where she was meant to be, surrounded by love until the very end." The crowd wept. Someone behind me whispered about what a devoted uncle he'd been, how he'd paid for all of Meredith's treatments when I couldn't afford them. That's when Colby moved. This little boy in his first suit, purchased just for this occasion, walked over to where I sat in the front row. He didn't say anything at first, just slipped his small hand into mine. His palm was sweaty, and I could feel him trembling. "Aunt Jessica," he whispered, quiet enough that only I could hear. "I need to tell you something about the night Meredith was born." I leaned down, thinking maybe he wanted to share a memory or needed comfort. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Daddy's crying about the wrong girl." His green eyes bore into mine with an intensity that made my chest tighten. "Should I tell you where Daddy really took your real baby that night? Because I know where she is. I know her name. And I know why Daddy's been getting those phone calls that make him so angry." The organ music continued playing. People kept filing past the casket. Garrett continued his speech about loss and love. But in that moment, my entire reality cracked open, and the truth started pouring in through the gaps. I need to take you back to where this nightmare began, 5 years ago in Riverside General Hospital, October 15th, 2019, at 3 in the morning. I was 27, alone, and terrified. The contractions had started during my shift at the marketing firm where I worked 60-hour weeks trying to prove myself. My boyfriend Travis had vanished 3 months earlier, the moment that second pink line appeared on the pregnancy test. He'd left a note saying he wasn't ready for fatherhood and moved to Seattle. I didn't chase him. This baby was my miracle, not his. Garrett was there that night, playing the perfect supportive sibling. He'd driven me to the hospital in his Mercedes, held my hand through contractions, even joked with the nurses to keep my spirits up. My sister's about to become the world's best mom, he told everyone who would listen. This baby hit the lottery getting Jessica as a mother. Our parents had died in a car accident 2 years earlier, heading home from their anniversary dinner. A drunk driver ran a red light. They left us the house, which I'd sold to pay off their medical debt and my student loans. Garrett had offered to help financially, but I was too proud back then. I wanted to prove I could stand on my own feet. Looking back, maybe if I'd accepted his help earlier, he wouldn't have felt entitled to make decisions about my life later. The delivery turned into an emergency quickly. The baby's heart rate dropped. Then mine spiked. Dr. Hensley rushed in, ordered an emergency C-section. "We need to move fast," he said. The last thing I remember before the anesthesia took hold was Garrett squeezing my hand, promising everything would be okay. When I woke up hours later, the room was dim and my throat was dry as sand. Garrett sat in the chair beside my bed, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a pink hospital blanket. His face was strange, like he was working hard to arrange his features into the right expression. "Meet your daughter, Jess," he said softly. "She's beautiful." But when he placed her in my arms, his hands shook. The baby was so small, maybe 5 pounds. She had a tube in her nose and monitors attached to her chest. Her skin had a bluish tint that made my stomach drop. "What's wrong with her?" My voice came out raspy and frightened. "That's when Dr. Hensley entered with a clipboard and that careful expression doctors wear when delivering bad news. "Your daughter has hypoplastic left heart syndrome. It's a severe congenital heart defect. She'll need multiple surgeries starting within the next few days." The words hit like physical blows. Hypoplastic, congenital, multiple surgeries. I looked down at this tiny person in my arms, her chest working so hard just to breathe. "But she'll be okay? After the surgeries?" Dr. Hensley exchanged a look with Garrett that I was too overwhelmed to analyze. "We'll do everything we can. She's a fighter." I named her Meredith after our grandmother, the strongest woman I'd ever known. Grandma Meredith had raised 6 kids alone after Grandpa died in the Korean War. If my daughter had even half her namesake's strength, she'd make it through this. The nurse, Patricia, was oddly attentive those first few days. She worked double shifts, always happened to be there when I needed help. "Some babies are just special," she'd say while adjusting Meredith's monitors. "They come into this world to teach us something important." At the time, I thought she was being philosophical. Now I know she was drowning in guilt. Garrett practically lived at the hospital that week. He handled all the insurance paperwork, argued with administrators about coverage, even hired a specialist from Johns Hopkins for a second opinion. "Don't worry about the cost," he kept saying. "Family takes care of family. That's what Mom and Dad would want." His wife Wendy visited once, bringing their 2-year-old son, Colby. She stood at the edge of the room like she was afraid to come closer. "She's so tiny," Wendy whispered, then made an excuse about Colby needing his nap and left within 10 minutes. That should have been my first red flag. What kind of sister-in-law runs from a baby fighting for her life? Before I took Meredith home, Garrett pulled me aside. "Jessica, you're going to face challenges other mothers never dream of, but you're not alone. I'll be here every step of the way. Whatever you need, whenever you need it." I believed him. Why wouldn't I? He was my brother. My only family. I had no idea that he'd already betrayed me in the worst way imaginable, that the sick infant I was taking home wasn't the healthy daughter I'd actually delivered. The next 5 years were a blur of hospital visits, specialist appointments, and sleepless nights. Meredith needed 3 surgeries before her 2nd birthday. The first one happened when she was just 4 days old. I sat in that waiting room for 9 hours, promising God everything I could think of if he'd just let her survive. The 2nd surgery came at 8 months, the 3rd at 18 months. Each time, the doctors warned me to prepare for the worst. Each time, Meredith proved them wrong. I quit my marketing job after her 2nd surgery. My boss, Kenneth, tried to be understanding, but no employer can accommodate an employee who misses 3 days a week for medical appointments. I burned through my savings account in 6 months. My 401k lasted another year. Then I started selling things. Mom's jewelry went first, then the living room furniture, then my car. I took the bus to the hospital carrying Meredith and her oxygen tank, ignoring the stares from other passengers. Garrett would visit monthly, always bringing expensive gifts. Organic baby food from some boutique store in Manhattan, designer clothes that Meredith would inevitably stain with medicine or vomit, educational toys she was too weak to play with. "How's my favorite niece?" he'd say. But something was off. He'd hold her like she was made of glass, stare at her face like he was memorizing it, then hand her back quickly. His wife Wendy stopped coming after Meredith's first birthday party. "It's too hard for her," Garrett explained, while we watched Meredith struggle to blow out her single candle. Seeing Meredith so sick reminds her how fragile life is. She's terrified something will happen to Colby. I wanted to scream at him. How nice that Wendy got to choose whether to see suffering. I didn't get that luxury. But I kept quiet because Garrett was paying for Meredith's medications that insurance wouldn't cover. $2,000 a month for one heart medication alone. Another $1,000 for the specialist who managed her case. He never complained, never made me feel like a burden, but the power dynamic had shifted. I needed him. The medical bills were crushing me. Collection agencies called daily. The hospital's financial office knew me by name. That's when Garrett stepped in with his generous offer. "Move into our guest house. It's just sitting empty. Free rent, and I'll cover all of Meredith's treatments." No arguments. The guest house was bigger than my apartment, with a beautiful view of their pool. Moving in felt like defeat, but Meredith needed stability. She'd just learned to walk again after her last surgery, taking these careful, proud steps across the physical therapy room. I'd do anything to keep her progress going. Living on his property, I started noticing things. Garrett took phone calls at strange hours, always walking to the far end of his yard where he thought no one could hear. He'd come back tense, snapping at Wendy about trivial things. There was a room in their house that stayed locked, even when they hosted parties. Wendy herself grew more distant, avoiding eye contact when we passed in the driveway. And Colby, sweet, quiet Colby, would sometimes say the strangest things. He'd started spending time in the guest house, playing quietly while Meredith napped. "Daddy says secrets keep families together," he told me once while coloring at my kitchen table. "What secrets, honey?" "The expensive kind. The kind that buy swimming pools and cars and trips to Disney World." He didn't look up from his coloring book. "We went to Disney World 3 times this year. Mommy says that's too many times, but Daddy says we can afford it now." Another time, I overheard him talking to Meredith during one of her good days. "You're lucky," he said. "You get to stay here with Aunt Jessica. I have to live in the big house where everyone's always fighting about money and papers and someone named Mr. Vaughn." The sicker Meredith got, the more generous Garrett became. A new wheelchair appeared overnight when her old one broke. Specialized medical equipment that insurance denied materialized in my living room. He hired a private nurse for the days when I was too exhausted to function. Our cousin Tamara asked once at a family barbecue, "How can Garrett afford all this?" "The real estate market isn't that good." "He made some smart investments," Wendy said quickly, then changed the subject. Then came that horrible morning, January 3rd, 2025. Meredith had been stable for weeks. We'd been planning her 5th birthday party, and she'd chosen a unicorn theme. She wanted purple balloons and a chocolate cake with rainbow frosting. I found her in her bed at sunrise, peaceful, like she was sleeping. Her favorite stuffed rabbit was tucked under her arm. Her lips were blue. The paramedics tried for 30 minutes. Dr. Hensley met us at the hospital, but I already knew. "Sometimes, with conditions this severe, the body just gives up," he said. He wouldn't look me in the eye when he said it. The funeral was Garrett's production from start to finish. He took over every detail while I sat in shock, unable to process that Meredith was really gone. Massive flower arrangements arrived from his business contacts. He hired the most expensive funeral home in the county, selected a white casket with pink silk lining that cost more than my old car, and arranged for a reception that could have been a wedding banquet. When I tried to protest the expense, he gripped my shoulders and said, "Jessica, please, let me do this. Let me honor my niece properly." The service was held at St. Catherine's Cathedral, even though we weren't Catholic. Garrett had somehow convinced the priest to make an exception. 200 people filled pews. I sat in the front row feeling like I was underwater, sounds muffled and distorted. Wendy sat 3 seats away from Garrett, I noticed. Colby positioned himself between me and his parents, his small body rigid in a new black suit. Garrett insisted on giving the eulogy. He stood at that podium like a senator addressing the nation, his voice breaking at all the right moments. "Meredith taught us all about courage," he said, actual tears streaming down his face. My precious niece faced every day with a smile despite pain that would break grown adults. She never complained, never asked why her. She just loved. She loved her mother with a fierce devotion. She loved her family with pure joy. She loved life even when life seemed determined not to love her back. People were sobbing. Even Wendy, who hadn't visited Meredith in 3 years, was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Dr. Hensley sat in the back row, head bowed. Patricia, the nurse from the night Meredith was born, stood against the wall like she couldn't commit to actually sitting down. I should have wondered why they were there, these medical professionals who delivered hundreds of babies. Why this one funeral? "Jessica," Garrett continued from the podium, "you gave that little angel the best life possible. Our family's love surrounded her until the very end. Mom and Dad would be so proud of the mother you became. Meredith was lucky to have you. We were all lucky to have her, even if only for 5 years." But Colby wasn't crying. The 7-year-old sat perfectly still beside me, his little hands clenched into fists on his lap. When everyone stood for the final prayer, he remained seated, staring at his father with an expression I'd never seen on a child's face before. It was contempt mixed with determination. After the service, people mingled in the reception hall, sharing stories about Meredith. Her kindergarten teacher described how Meredith had insisted on being line leader, even when she needed her walker. The pharmacist talked about how she'd always say thank you for her medicine, even the ones that tasted terrible. Each story felt like another goodbye. That's when Colby tugged on my black dress. His face was pale but resolute, like he'd been gathering courage for this exact moment. "Aunt Jessica, can I tell you something?" I knelt down to his level, thinking he needed comfort. Maybe he wanted to share a memory of playing with Meredith, or needed reassurance about death. "Of course, sweetheart, you can tell me anything. Daddy's crying about the wrong girl." His green eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Should I tell you where Daddy really took your real baby that night?" The reception hall didn't actually go silent, but in my head, everything stopped. The room seemed to spin slightly. "What do you mean, Colby?" He glanced around to make sure no one else was listening, then leaned closer. "I heard Daddy on the phone last week. He was in his locked office, but he was yelling so loud I could hear through the door. He was fighting with someone named Mr. Vaughn. Daddy said, 'I delivered my end of the bargain 5 years ago. Your daughter is healthy and beautiful. My sister's child died as agreed. Pay the rest or I'll tell everyone the truth.'" My hands were shaking. I grabbed Colby's small shoulders, probably too hard, but I needed to steady myself. "Colby, this is very important. What else did you hear?" "Daddy said Nora Vaughn isn't sick like Meredith was. He said she's perfect. He said she has Jessica's eyes and Jessica's smile. That's you, Aunt Jessica. He said she looks just like you." The floor felt like it was tilting. "Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure that's what you heard?" Colby reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. Daddy taught me to always document important conversations. He didn't know he was teaching me to document him. I waited until midnight to confront Garrett. The guests were gone. Wendy had taken sleeping pills and gone to bed, and Colby was asleep in the guest house where I'd asked him to stay. He'd given me one more piece of crucial information. The code to his father's locked office was their parents' anniversary date. "Daddy thinks he's sentimental," Colby had said, "but really he just can't remember random numbers." The office door opened with a soft click. Inside, filing cabinets lined the walls, each one meticulously labeled. Real estate deals, property holdings, tax documents, and there, in the bottom drawer of the last cabinet, "Personal, confidential." My hands trembled as I pulled out a thick folder labeled Baby Switch, Riverside General. The papers told the whole story in devastating detail. Medical records, bank transfers, email exchanges dating back 6 years. Garrett had been planning this before I even got pregnant. He'd met the Vaughns at a medical conference where they'd been desperately seeking alternatives for their unborn child's fatal diagnosis. Multiple organ failure, 0 chance of survival beyond a few weeks. They needed a miracle. Garrett offered them one for $2 million. The contract was there in black and white. Healthy newborn to be delivered on or around October 15th, 2019. My due date. He'd known I was pregnant before I'd even told him. He'd hacked into my medical portal, saw my prenatal appointments, and started making arrangements. Dr. Hensley owed him $300,000 from a gambling debt and a covered-up malpractice suit. Patricia, the nurse, needed money for her son's cancer treatment. Garrett promised to pay for everything if they helped him switch the babies. My healthy daughter was born at 3:47 a.m. The Vaughn baby was born at 3:52 a.m. in the same hospital, already dying. While I was unconscious from the emergency C-section, they switched the infants, changed the medical records, swapped the identification bands. My daughter was rushed away in a private ambulance to the Vaughn's Manhattan penthouse. Their dying child was placed in my arms when I woke up. I found photos in the folder, surveillance shots Garrett had taken over the years. A little girl with my exact eyes and my stubborn chin learning to ride a bike in Central Park. The same child blowing out candles on elaborate birthday cakes, playing violin at what looked like Carnegie Hall, riding a horse at some elite equestrian center. In every photo, she was glowing with health, radiating the kind of vitality Meredith never had. The most recent photo was dated a week ago. Nora Vaughn at her 5th birthday party, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Meredith's entire medical equipment. She was laughing, surrounded by dozens of children, a mountain of presents behind her. The same day, Meredith had been too weak to eat her birthday cake. Garrett entered his office at 12:23 a.m. He froze when he saw me sitting at his desk, the papers spread across it like evidence at a trial, which is exactly what they were. Jessica, I can explain. Explain how you sold my baby? Explain how you let me pour 5 years of love into a child you knew was dying while my daughter grew up calling strangers mommy and daddy. He closed the door behind him, and for a moment, I saw the real Garrett. Not the loving brother, not the generous uncle, but the calculating businessman who'd traded his sister's child for money. The Vaughn baby would have died anyway. She had maybe 3 weeks, maximum. At least with you, she had 5 years of love. Real love. And Nora has everything. The best schools, the best doctors, every opportunity in the world. I saved her from poverty, Jessica. You stole her from her mother. I gave her a better life. You could barely afford rent. You would have raised her in crappy apartments, sent her to failing schools, worked yourself to death trying to provide. Now she has private tutors, speaks 3 languages, plays 2 instruments. She's thriving. She's not yours to save. She was mine. Garrett's mask finally cracked completely. And what about Meredith? I kept her alive longer than any doctor predicted. That money paid for experimental treatments, the best specialists. Equipment, insurance, would never cover. She lived 5 years instead of 3 weeks. You got to be a mother because of what I did. I was already a mother. You just stole my child and gave me someone else's to watch die. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Garrett lunged for it, but I was already talking to the dispatcher. I need to report a kidnapping and fraud. My brother sold my newborn child 5 years ago and switched her with a dying infant. I have all the evidence right here. Garrett sank into a chair as sirens wailed in the distance. Jessica, please. Think about what you're doing. Think about Colby. Colby is the only honest person in your family. He's the one who told me the truth. The police arrived in 4 squad cars. As they led Garrett away in handcuffs, he turned back one last time. I loved Meredith too, he said. I visited her every month. I paid for everything. Doesn't that count for something? You visited your victim. You paid with blood money. And no, it counts for nothing at all. The investigation took 4 months, but the evidence was overwhelming. Garrett had kept everything, thinking his wealth and connections made him untouchable. Every email, every bank transfer, every forged document was still in that office, like trophies from his crime. Dr. Hensley confessed immediately when faced with the evidence. He broke down in the interrogation room, admitting everything while begging for immunity. He didn't get it. Patricia, the nurse, had fled to the Philippines 3 years earlier, but left behind a detailed confession in a safety deposit box, knowing this day might come. She wrote that she couldn't live with the guilt, but couldn't afford to return the money that had saved her son's life. Garrett got 15 years for kidnapping, fraud, and conspiracy. The judge called it one of the most calculated and cruel crimes she'd ever presided over. Wendy divorced him before the trial even ended. She took Colby and moved back to Oregon to live with her parents. During the proceedings, she swore she never knew, and looking at her shattered face, I believed her. She'd been another victim of Garrett's deception, living in a house built on blood money. Colby testified with the bravery of someone triple his age. He sat in that witness chair, his feet not even touching the ground, and clearly told the court what he'd overheard. My daddy did a bad thing, he said simply to the judge. He took Aunt Jessica's real baby and gave her a sick baby instead. That's not what families do. The prosecutor said his testimony was the key to the conviction. This 7-year-old boy had done what none of the adults could, told the truth. Meeting Nora, my biological daughter, was surreal and heartbreaking in equal measure. The Vaughn's lawyer arranged the first meeting at a neutral location, a child psychologist's office decorated with toys and bright colors. Nora walked in wearing a designer dress and ballet flats, her hair in perfect French braids. She had my exact eyes, down to the little gold flecks around the pupils, my stubborn chin, my mother's nose, but her mannerisms were all Vaughn, refined and careful, nothing like the chaotic energy I'd imagined my daughter would have. Hello, she said formally, extending her small hand for a handshake. I'm Nora. You're my biological mother. Someone had coached her well. The Vaughns, devastated but ultimately decent people, agreed to supervised visits that gradually increased over time. They weren't villains in this story. They genuinely believed they'd adopted an abandoned child through Garrett's private adoption service. He'd told them I was a drug addict who'd surrendered my rights. They'd paid $2 million believing they were covering medical expenses and legal fees. When they learned the truth, Mrs. Vaughn collapsed and had to be hospitalized for shock. We're all in family therapy now. Every Thursday, the Vaughns and I sit in Dr. Martinez's office trying to navigate this impossible situation. Nora, who's 6 now, is slowly warming to me. Last week, she asked if she could call me Mom too, since I have 2 moms who love me. Mrs. Vaughn and I both cried. We're writing new rules for what family means, creating something that has no blueprint. But here's what haunts me in the quiet moments. I did love Meredith completely. She wasn't my biological daughter, but for 5 years, she was my entire world. Every sleepless night, every terrifying surgery, every small victory when she managed to eat without throwing up or walked across the room without falling, those were real. Our love was real. When she called me Mommy, when she reached for me when she was scared, when she told me she loved me bigger than the whole sky, that was truth. I visit Meredith's grave every Sunday. I bring purple flowers because purple was her favorite color. I tell her about my week, about Nora, about how Colby sends drawings from Oregon. I thank her for teaching me how to be a mother, how to love without conditions, how to fight for someone even when the odds are impossible. She prepared me for the complicated love I now have to navigate with Nora. The Vaughns kept the name Nora, and so did I. She's Nora Vaughn Torres now, a hyphenated existence that reflects her hyphenated life. She spends weekdays with the Vaughns in Manhattan and weekends with me in a small apartment I rent with the settlement money from the hospital. We're finding our rhythm slowly. She's teaching me about her world of violin lessons and equestrian competitions. I'm teaching her about my world of Saturday morning cartoons and chocolate chip pancakes from scratch. Love isn't about blood or birth certificates or who was there first. It's about showing up, again and again, even when it's complicated and messy and doesn't look like anyone else's story. I had 2 daughters, one I raised and lost, one I lost and found. Both of them made me a mother. Both of them taught me that love multiplies rather than divides, that a heart can break and expand simultaneously. Garrett stole 5 years from Nora and me, but Meredith gave me 5 years of purpose that prepared me for this fractured, rebuilt version of motherhood. Every day I choose to honor both my daughters, because that's what mothers do. We love beyond logic, beyond loss, beyond what anyone else can understand. If you found this story meaningful, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about your own experiences with family, loss, or unexpected love. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us that even in our darkest moments, truth and love find a way to surface. Thank you for listening to my story.